Please be advised, this video includes spoilers for Final Fantasy XIV through the main story quest, Endwalker. The Allagan Empire is a large piece of Final Fantasy XIV. It's a long-lost civilization that influenced many technological miracles and threats. Unfortunately, their greatest leader reached too far and cast the once great nation into darkness. And all of this happens way before the main character is even born. So how did the Allagan Empire rise to greatness? What's the impact behind its legacy? And how did such a powerful nation fall? Let's examine everything we know. I really hope you enjoy. Let's begin with a brief look at Final Fantasy XIV's timeline. The earliest period we know of is the Ancient Era. This is approximately 12,000 years before the main story. Atheris, the star where the game takes place, is ruled by the Ancients. They're a race at the pinnacle of technology and magic, specifically creation magics. The Convocation of 14 governs the star during this time. Now, the Ancient Era comes to an abrupt end when the Song of Oblivion corrupts the Ancients' creations, plunging the star into absolute chaos. The Convocation summons the Dark Primal Zodiarch to repair the damage, but a group of rebels summon Hydaelyn to fight back. The Light Primal lands the finishing blow, powerful enough to sunder the star and every soul on it. Everything breaks into 14 reflections. Only 3 ancients survive, emet-selch, Elidibus, and Lahabrea. The 3 unsundered begin laboring to reunite the source with its sundered shards, seeing no value in the billions of broken souls left behind compared to the sacrifices of their lost people. The races of man refer to them as Ascians. They have a penchant for meddling in historical events, which will come into play in this story. Next is the First Astral Era. The Encyclopedia Eorzea Volume 1 says this about that time. It is during the First Astral Era that mankind is believed to have learned the essentials for survival, the ability to carve stone tools, and the ability to make fire. Tools allowed for the rise of agriculture and a departure from hunting and gathering, which eventually resulted in the abandonment of nomadic lifestyles and saw the establishment of villages and towns. Then follows the Second Astral Era. The calamity that brought about the rejoining of that time paved the way for basic magic. Here's another excerpt from the Encyclopedia Volume 1. The people were drawn to these charismatic leaders who accredited the fall of the previous era with the faithless kings and their unquenchable avarice. They claimed that only through prayer and faith would they be saved from a similar fate, and thus were the first organized religions born. But in a matter of years, kingdoms centuries in the making were replaced with theocracies populated with men and women eager to prove their worth to the gods. Eventually, things took another turn south as the power of those churches corrupted leaders. Holy wars, witch hunts, and cleansings commenced. The world suffered, and the gods answered with their wrath once more. The sun grew large in the sky, bringing about the calamity of fire. We're now 5,000 years before the main story, the Third Astral Era, when Eorzean civilization arguably reached its peak in terms of technology. This is the time of the Allagan Empire. Before we go into the details of this period, let's jump forward to the Sixth Astral Era and look into the story of Saint Coinage. He was a determined man and quite clever. Coinage was a member of Nodthal's Seminarian and earned consistently high marks among his peers. Leaders hoped he'd become a pillar of the church, but Coinage became infatuated with a long-lost empire mentioned in Holy Scripture, Allag. He abruptly ended his studies to find anything he could on the empire. Friends deserted him, the church excommunicated him, but this didn't crush Coinage's dreams. They only pushed him to prove everyone wrong, and he found his life-changing discovery in Mordona. Everything changed for Coinage. Universities wanted him on staff. People offered to pay for future expeditions. Coinage was further vindicated after he died when he was canonized by the followers of Althik. St. Coinage's discoveries fueled the fire for ancient Allagan artifacts. Much of what we know about their civilization comes because of the path he paved. The Allagan Empire came during a period of departure from religion. Society was distancing itself from the gods after incurring the wrath of the heavens in the most recent calamity. People put faith in themselves, not deities. This newfound confidence in science and technology produced some of the greatest minds of Eorzea's history. That includes Allag's first emperor, Xande. He is a direct reference to the antagonist with the same name from Final Fantasy III. Xande was intelligent and highly ambitious. He used his charisma to build a nation founded in science, but also one that respected the magic of ages past. He welcomed the descendants of priests and witches into his armies. This deadly combination allowed the young Xande to invade and capture neighboring lands with minimal casualties. Allagan became the largest nation in Eorzea in less than a year. Xande's era of the Empire was also heavily propped up by its mages. They were able to advance spell weaving to incorporate magics into existing scientific principles. For example, siege engines were able to launch projectiles further and with greater accuracy. Cranes lifted blocks 10 times their maximum load with just a fraction of the manpower. These advances were the basis for etherochemistry. This field is what really propelled Allagan into the golden age of prosperity. Perhaps the greatest achievement of this time is the Circus Tower, also known as the Crystal Tower in modern era, a resplendent spire forged of crystal that collects and stores energies from the sun. Its defenses were incredible. The 8 sentinels were the first line of defense, each pair creating elemental barriers that prevented any means of breaching. Even greater protectors lied within. Projects like the Circus Tower paved the way for the Allagans to rely on machines to ease the burdens of everyday life. Another technological marvel is the forbidden floating continent of Aziz Law above Alabanthia's spire. Aziz Law was at the forefront of Allagan science. It was within its halls that Allagan scientists perfected techniques for creating and twisting life, even constructing automatons. The very center of this facility is this massive flagship. This is also where the Etherico-Chemical Research Facility is located. Players can visit this zone as part of the Heavensward story. The floating continent is a direct reference to its equivalent in Final Fantasy VI. Allagan scientists also ventured off Aetheris to explore parts of the Sea of Stars. That's the equivalent of outer space for our planet Earth. We've known since the original 1.0 story for Final Fantasy XIV that Allagan creations were in Aetheris' orbit. But did you know that an Allagan vessel is currently sitting on the moon? We learned this from the side quest A Strange New Moon in Mare Lamentorum. The quest brings you to Recording Way, who tells you that while the Loperids were sleeping, some strange fungi appeared. Recording Way says an Allagan vessel crashed here many years ago, and some of it pierced the wall of their underground bioplant. Recording Way believes that's where the fungi came from and how they got inside. The map of Mare Lamentorum tells us that the area where the ship crashed is Heimdall's last site. Records indicate this ship must have crashed during the 7th Umbral Era, much closer to modern times. We'll explain why this is later, but remember that the Allagans had multiple space-ready vessels. So, did Emperor Xande find the right combination of people, talents, and resources to make all of these breakthroughs on his own? It's much more likely that he had a helping hand. Emet-selch says this during Shadowbringers in the Crystarium.
The once great nation whose ingenuity gave birth to this tower was shaped by my hand. As such, I know full well the wonders it can facilitate and those it cannot.
We know Emet-selch passed on knowledge of magic, technology, and other skills to the Allagan Empire. It's never explicitly stated that he met with Emperor Xande himself during this time, but given that the Ascian claims direct responsibility for the crafting of the Circus Tower, it would make sense for the Emperor to have taken the Ascian's counsel. That knowledge helped lay the foundation for what the Allagans came to be.
Heed me, Amon. No matter how vast one's empire, or full one's treasure vault, all is rendered meaningless by death. In the end, all is lost.
Xande tried to conquer as much of the star as he could. He managed to subjugate much of the world's civilizations, but the Emperor's greatest limitation was his own mortality. The man couldn't live forever, so the Emperor set his sights on preserving his legacy for years to come. His direct descendants fostered the growth of the Empire by sending its armies to Ilsabard and Authard. There was resistance, of course, but none lasted very long. Eventually, every major city in the three great continents flew the Allagan flag. There were no more enemies left to fight. Xande passes away, buried in a tomb in a crystalline cavern in Mordona. The mages thought the concentrated levels of pure etherical energy might repair the Emperor's corrupted flesh and restore his soul. Peace prevailed, and the people thrived for centuries. Breakthroughs in science came from a desire to better the lives of its citizens. The miracles of etherochemistry gave the people everything they wanted and more, but this complacency stunted the growth of the empire. Ambition shifted to leisure, birth rates plummeted, and suicide became much more common. Poor leadership and complacency led to uprisings. The empire had grown too big, too fast. Xande was gone, and the aimless nation lacked direction. That is until one man stepped in, a talented technologist by the name of Amon. He believed the Allagans needed a strong leader to thrive once more, not inventions. Someone who could ignite the fire in the hearts of men. They needed a new Xande, but instead of waiting until a potential candidate came along to be groomed for leadership, Amon set his sights on something different. Resurrecting the late Emperor himself. Amon was one of the few great minds that saw the slow deterioration of the Allagan people. He spent his early years on medical developments, eventually shifting to vivimancy, that's the use of intimate knowledge of primal forces to create, mutate, and ultimately enhance living things. These arts are what he would use to resurrect Xande. The Allagan technologist began a series of experiments to unlock the secrets to eternal life. He combined chimerobiology and cloning, using brigands and revolutionaries as subjects first. He moved on to members of the royal bloodline where he refined his process. Two specific people were Une and Doga. Amon created copies of each of them. He eventually moved on to experimenting on himself. The results were promising enough to unearth Xande's corpse. They used solar energies in the Crystal Tower to achieve the unthinkable. Xande I walked the star again. Amon and the resurrected Xande made for a dangerous pair. Not only was the former emperor alive, he was now immortal and gifted with incredible strength. Amon briefed Xande of everything he had missed since his demise. The emperor moved quickly to right the ship, slaying the current emperor and any potential challengers to his throne. He bulked up the imperial armies and set it on a course for southern Mericidia. Amon was right. Xande's return revitalized the empire to what it once was, but the Mericidians wouldn't give up their homes so easily. The natives fought bravely under the leadership of dragons. This didn't deter the Allagans, however. Through biological manipulation, they crafted monstrosities that were powerful enough to slay great worms. One such battle saw the defeat of Bahamut, a member of the first brood to land on Etheris. With the dragons all but defeated, the Mericidians turned to religion for salvation. They summoned powerful beings known as icons. We know them as primals. Now, there's no record of primal summonings on Mericidia prior to this, but right after the fall of Bahamut, several were called. It's speculated that the Mericidians had outside help, but that's a story and speculation for another video. Three primals proved to be the most troublesome for the Allagans: Sephiroth, the Fiend, Sophia, the Goddess, and Zervan, the Demon. They became known as the Warring Triad, pushing the Allagan invaders back to the coast. That's another Final Fantasy VI reference if you're keeping track. Xande was enraged when he heard the news. He demanded a solution, threatening to kill a man each day until his request was fulfilled. So how did the Allagans stop the Warring Triad? The Encyclopedia Eorzea Volume 1 tells us that Imperial mages eventually discovered a means of imprisoning the icons instead of defeating them. This became the basis for modern summoning magic. But in the Endwalker story, when the Echo shows us visions of Amon's past, we see it was the Ascian emet-selch who guided their hands. He bestowed great deals of knowledge to the Allagans, including how to bind primals. Ascians have a history of meddling in mortal affairs to bring shards closer to calamity, but emet-selch wanted to meet Amon for other reasons too. Amon's knowledge and ambition have ties to the ancient past. At some point during his life, Amon was visited by the Ascian emet-selch. The man had much to share with the Allagan technologist. Emet-selch opened Amon's mind, showing him memories of a former life. Amon's soul is a piece of the ancient Fandaniel, a convocation of 14 members whose true name is Hermes. Amon decides to join the Ascians, seemingly working towards the goal of reviving Zodiark and bringing the ancients back. Of course, we know from Endwalker that Fandaniel had his own agenda. We'll discuss that later, but remember that the Ascians gave the Allagans the ability to turn the tide of the war with Mericidia. Bahamut's mate was Tiamat, another great worm from the First Brood. She was devastated by her mate's demise and sought to resurrect the Dawn Dragon. However, the Great Worm was not as he once was. The beast was twisted with rage, just a shade of what Bahamut used to be. The Primal unleashed his fury on the Allagan army, eliminating any advantage they once had. Despite the setbacks, Emperor Xande found the ever-changing tide of battle amusing. It said he told advisors he never felt more alive than during the Mericidia campaign. He also believed that a man was only as strong as the men he killed, so he welcomed the onslaught of powerful enemies as a symbol of his nation's power. The war with Mericidia boosted the advancement of technology and magic. Dragons could be slain. Icons would be tamed and used as an endless source of energy. The Empire was stronger than it had ever been, and yet despite their success, this is a pivotal moment in the Empire's history. The moment when their immortal leader made a pact with a being of immense power and darkness. Its greatest technologist began his descent into madness. Decisions were made that would not only put Allag on a crash course for its demise, but also potentially put the entire star in danger. We'll explore the fall and legacy of the Allagan Empire in the next video. Until then, be sure to subscribe so you know when that video goes live. You can also join the Lore Link Shell Discord to stay in touch with me and other members of the community. The link is in the description. Also, tell me what you think the most important invention is that the Allagans built. I love reading your guys' comments. Take care, warriors, and I'll see you next time.